Shortened version of the book, The Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros. Georgia Stanton returns to her hometown with a broken heart and an unfinished manuscript in her hands. Her great-grandmother, legendary author Scarlett Stanton, left behind an unfinished story, and now the publisher has assigned Noah Harrison, an arrogant and successful author, to complete it. But as Georgia and Noah dig into the past, they discover that the novel hides a devastating truth. Can they resist the growing magnetism between them, or will the weight of history drag them to a destiny they never imagined? Part 1. Debris from the Past. Georgia Stanton never thought she'd be back in Poplar Grove. But here she was at the DMV, waiting for the call to reclaim her name. She was no longer Georgia Ellsworth. No more gold rings on her finger, no more perfect life in New York. 6 years of marriage reduced to a paperwork and an article in Celebrity Weekly. Number 98, Juliet Sinclair's flat voice broke through the hum of the room. Georgia walked forward, her back straight. Juliet smiled at her with that superiority she hadn't lost since high school. Shift number, I'm the only one here. Juliet blinked, but Sophie, the other employee, stepped in before the moment could become awkward. Leave her alone, Juliet. Georgia, welcome home, home. As if calling Poplar Grove home made sense anymore. After everything she'd lost, her great-grandmother Scarlett Stanton's house was still intact despite the passage of time, an imposing structure filled with memories, stories, and the scent of old books. The legendary writer had passed away 6 months ago, leaving her with an inheritance she hadn't expected, her literary legacy. But the publisher didn't want to simply preserve Scarlett's memory. They wanted her final manuscript. It's an unfinished masterpiece, the editor had said with an enthusiasm that Georgia found almost obscene. And that's where Noah Harrison came in. Noah fucking Harrison. Best-selling author, arrogant, brilliant, and now the one chosen to complete what Scarlett couldn't. You don't have a choice, Georgia, the editor reminded her over the phone. The publisher owns the rights. If Noah doesn't finish it, someone else will. Noah Harrison, the man who'd turned literature into a marketing spectacle. How could she trust him with her great-grandmother's words? When Noah got home, the tension in the air was palpable. Nice place, he said with a crooked smile, his gaze scanning the stacks of books. Don't screw it up, Georgia replied. Noah dropped his suitcase and crossed his arms. Look, I know you don't want me here, but I also know that Scarlett Stanton was one of the best writers of her generation. I want to finish this book because she deserves it, not because of you. Great, then keep things professional. I always do. Their gazes met. Invisible sparks floated in the air, but it wasn't attraction, it couldn't be. It was defiance, because this wasn't just a book. It was the last vestige of Scarlett Stanton, and maybe, just maybe, Georgia's last chance to confront the rubble of her own past. Part 2. Unwritten Letters. The first days were a silent battle. Noah wrote in Scarlett's study, buried in piles of papers with half-finished notes. Georgia wandered around the house, unable to decide whether to help or sabotage him. Every time she passed the door, she saw his brow furrowed, his hand running over his jaw, his gaze fixed on his great-grandmother's antique typewriter as if he were trying to communicate with a ghost. You don't need to use that, she said one afternoon, peering into the doorway. Noah looked up. Excuse me? The typewriter. Scarlett only used it when she wanted to feel nostalgic. Then she put everything on the computer. Noah shrugged. I like the sound of it, it helps me think, Georgia snorted. So, some divine revelation. Noah drummed his fingers on the table. The story is more complicated than it seems. There's something Scarlett didn't want to write. Georgia folded her arms. And how do you know that? Noah picked up a sheaf of typewritten paper and pointed to the margins. Here. These blank spaces, it's like she's avoiding certain words, and in her personal notes there are constant mentions of one name, Jameson. The name hit Georgia like a punch in the stomach. Jameson was her first love. Noah studied her with interest. And what happened to him? Georgia pursed her lips. He died in the war. That night, Georgia searched the attic of the house for something that might give her answers. Noah was right. Scarlett hadn't finished the book for a reason. But what reason? Among dusty boxes she found a wooden trunk with engraved initials, SS, inside yellowed letters tied with a blue silk ribbon. Scarlett's handwriting. With trembling fingers she untied the ribbon and opened the first letter. My dearest Jameson, this is not the end of us. My heart will always be with you, no matter where you are. The words brought a lump to her throat. What did you find? Georgia turned her head. Noah stood in the doorway, barefoot, his hair disheveled. Letters. From Scarlett to Jameson. Noah entered the room and crouched beside him. May I? Georgia hesitated a second before handing him one of the letters. Noah read it silently, his expression growing more somber. God, she whispered. What? Noah looked up. Jameson didn't die in the war. Georgia's heart stopped. What are you saying? Noah held the letter in the air. Scarlett put it down, and she did it for a reason she didn't want to write in her novels. The ground seemed to fall away from beneath her feet. All her life, Georgia had believed in her great-grandmother's tragic story. A love cut short by war, an eternal duel. But what if it had all been a lie? We have to read them all, Noah said. Georgia swallowed. Yes, but this changes everything. Noah nodded. Yes, and it changes the ending of this book too. Part 3. Echoes of a Lost Love. The letters were a map to a past no one knew about. Every word, every sentence written in faded ink, told a different story than the one Georgia had believed all her life. Scarlett Stanton had not been the woman in eternal mourning the family remembered. She had been someone else, someone who had made an impossible decision and buried it between the pages of an unfinished manuscript. This is crazy, Georgia whispered, running her fingertips over the last letter. Noah sat cross-legged on the floor, resting his elbows on his knees and staring at her. No, this is the truth. And what are we supposed to do with it? He smiled wryly. Write it down. Georgia shook her head. People don't want the truth. They want the Scarlett Stanton romance. They want the myth. Noah leaned toward her, his voice low but intense. And what do you want? The discovery of the letters changed the dynamic between them. Before, Noah had been an intruder in Georgia's life. Now they were complicit in a secret that could change Scarlett's legacy forever. Days passed between ink and paper, between reconstructed dialogues and pages that came to life with each stroke of the typewriter. Noah was relentless, immersing himself in the story like a man possessed. Georgia tried to keep her distance, but every word they wrote together was an invisible thread that brought them closer. One afternoon, as they were reviewing Scarlett's notes, Noah stopped dead. Here. Georgia leaned over his shoulder. What? Noah pointed to a handwritten paragraph in the margin of one of the typed sheets. If I could go back, I'd choose differently. But it's too late now. Georgia felt a chill. Scarlett regretted it. Noah looked at her, his expression grave. Maybe she just knew that some decisions can't be undone. The room became too small, too loaded with meanings that neither of them wanted to face. That night, Georgia went down to the study and found him, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his gaze lost in the manuscript. You should sleep, she said. Noah let out a low laugh. You too. Georgia leaned against the doorway, crossing her arms. Noah, why did you agree to this? You didn't need to. He set his glass down and exhaled slowly. Because Scarlett Stanton was my heroine. Georgia blinked, surprised. Really? Noah ran a hand through his hair. I read her first book when I was 16. It was the first time I felt like literature could be more than just pretty words. Georgia felt something inside her bend a little. I didn't know. Noah smiled sadly. There's a lot you don't know about me. The words floated between them like a dangerous invitation, like a point of no return. Georgia swallowed. Good night, Noah. And she left before her body decided to betray her. Part 4. Between the Pages of Destiny. The book was coming to life. Every day, every page, every word they added pieced together, the story Scarlett never finished. And yet the further they went, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a book. It was a puzzle with missing pieces, an echo of a love that ended not with war, but with a choice. Georgia spent her nights reading and rereading the letters, trying to understand the woman she thought she knew. Jameson, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I want you to know that what I did was out of love. It was never his fault. The letters weren't goodbyes. They were regrets. She left him. Georgia dropped the paper on the table with a whisper. Noah, sitting across from her, nodded. But not because I didn't love him. The thought made her uneasy. Why would Scarlett Stanton, the woman who wrote the most iconic love stories of her generation, give up on hers? Noah stretched out in his chair, rubbing his eyes. We're missing something. I know. Georgia knew the answer was out there somewhere. She just had to find it. One afternoon, rummaging through Scarlett's papers, she found a sealed envelope with a single word written on the front. Jameson. The air grew thick. Noah, he looked up and saw what she was holding. God? Georgia slid her finger under the flap and opened it with reverential care. Inside a single piece of paper, with one last letter. If you're reading this, it means the past has finally caught up with us. What I did, what I left behind, wasn't just out of fear. It was out of protection. Jameson, if you knew the truth, you'd hate me. Georgia felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Protection, what the hell is he talking about? Noah took the letter and read it silently. Then he looked up, his expression a storm. Jameson didn't die in the war. Georgia stared at him. What? Noah ran his tongue along his bottom lip as if searching for the right words. Scarlett didn't lose him. She let him, but not because she wanted to, but because something forced her to. The tension between them grew with each revelation. It wasn't just Scarlett and Jameson, it was Georgia and Noah too. It was the attraction that swam between them, silent but unrelenting. One night, after hours of writing, Noah leaned back against the table and looked at her. Do you realize what we're doing? Georgia swallowed. Writing a book, Noah smiled wryly. No, we're rewriting a life. She felt a shiver run down her spine. And if we don't like how it ends, what do we do? Noah held her gaze. We change the ending. The words hung between them, charged with a meaning that went beyond the book, because maybe somewhere between Scarlett Stanton's pages, their story was also written. Part 5, Buried Truths. Georgia couldn't breathe. The letter in her hands shook, as if the paper were absorbing the weight of the truth. Jameson didn't die in the war. Scarlett left him, for protection. But protection from what? Noah was leaning over the table, his brow furrowed, his fingers drumming against the wood. His mind was working as fast as Georgia's, picking apart every word, every possible hidden meaning in that last letter. Protection from who? He murmured. Georgia shook her head, anguish in her throat. I don't know, but this changes everything. That night, Georgia barely slept. When the clock struck 3 a.m., she got out of bed and went down to the study. Noah's lamp was still on. She found him on the work table, surrounded by notes, papers, and a half-empty bottle of whiskey. I can't leave him. Noah ran a hand through his disheveled hair. There's something here, Georgia, something Scarlett never wanted us to know about. She stepped closer, her gaze caught on the scattered pages. My great-grandmother was never a woman to run from anything. But this was bigger than her. Noah exhaled slowly. And if we keep digging, we're going to find out what it was. The next morning, the past hit Georgia in the face. It happened at the village cafe, when a woman with gray hair and a questioning look approached their table. Georgia Stanton, I can't believe you're here. Georgia forced a smile. Hello, Mrs. Langley. The woman inclined her head in interest. They say you're working on your great-grandmother's latest book. Georgia felt the weight of Noah's gaze on her. Yes, we try. Mrs. Langley's smile faded. I hope you're careful what you write, dear. Some stories are better buried. The air in the diner seemed to grow colder. Excuse me? Noah asked, his tone hardening. The woman shook her head. Scarlett Stanton wasn't the saint everyone thinks she is, and Jameson, well, sometimes it's best to leave the past where it is. Georgia felt something snap inside her. What do you know? The woman leaned across the table and whispered, I know there are truths that can destroy a person's legacy or their family. And with that she walked away. Georgia didn't move. Noah didn't either. They just exchanged a look, each asking the same question. What the hell was Scarlett Stanton hiding? Part 6, The Price of Memory. Mrs. Langley's words hung in Georgia's mind like a slow-acting poison. Some stories are better buried, but Georgia couldn't let it go, not now. Back in the house, she searched the attic with desperate intensity. She knew Scarlett had left something else behind. A clue, a truth waiting to be discovered. Noah appeared in the doorway, watching her silently before speaking. What are you looking for? I don't know. Georgia pushed a box too hard, sending dust flying into the air. But it has to be here. Noah studied it for a moment, then bent down to help her. If Scarlett wanted to hide it, it's not going to be in plain sight. And then she saw it. A false compartment at the bottom of an old trunk. Georgia held her breath as she reached in and pulled out a yellowing envelope, thicker than the others. It had no name on it, just a date, 1945. She sat down on the floor, Noah beside her. With shaking hands, she tore open the envelope. Inside was a photo, Scarlett, young and radiant, her arms around a dark-haired man in a military uniform, Jameson. Georgia ran her fingers over the picture, her throat tight. Then she pulled out the folded paper behind the photo and began to read quietly. Jameson, you should never have come back for me. I should never have let you think it was possible. My life is not what you think it is. There are things I never told you, things I can't tell you, but if you stay, they will destroy you, and I won't let them. I can't, forgive me. Scarlett, the silence that followed was thick. Noah took the letter, his expression grim. She didn't leave it out of fear. She left it because someone made her. Georgia felt a chill run down her spine. But who? Noah turned the photo over and saw something written on the back. God. Georgia read the words aloud. Don't let them find it. Their eyes met, and in that instant they knew they were a lot closer to the truth than was certain. Part 7. Where the story ends. Georgia looked at the photo, at the note. Scarlett's handwritten words seemed to scream at her from the past. Don't let them find him. Scarlett was protecting him, she murmured. Noah nodded slowly. But from whom? Georgia closed her eyes, searching for answers in her childhood memories. Her great-grandmother had always been a strong, determined woman, but there was also a hidden sadness in her gaze, one she could never explain until now. Maybe Jameson saw something, she said finally. Something he shouldn't have. Noah frowned. And Scarlett decided to walk away to save him. Georgia swallowed. It seemed so. The silence stretched between them, thick as the dust in that room. Noah stood up, pacing in circles. If we tell this story, if we let the book end the way it really did, everyone will see Scarlett differently. Georgia looked up. So what? It's the truth. It is. Noah stared at her intently. Scarlett Stanton's story is the story of an impossible love, a tragic romance that inspired generations. Do you really want to destroy that? Georgia felt the answer in her chest before she could say it out loud. It's not destroying it. It's honoring it. The manuscript was finished a week later. The last pages burned with the truth Scarlett could never write. Her love for Jameson, her sacrifice, her forced silence. When Georgia wrote the last line, she exhaled with a shudder. Noah sat across from her, watching her silently. You did it. Georgia set her pen down on the table. We did it. They stood there, the weight of the book between them, with Scarlett Stanton's story finally complete, and with something else, something they couldn't ignore any longer. Noah leaned in close, his voice a whisper. What do we do now? Georgia looked at him, her heart pounding like a storm. That depends. On what? She swallowed. On whether we're ready to write our own story. Noah smiled. I always have been, and when he kissed her, Georgia knew there were no more blank pages. Their story, theirs, was just beginning. The End of the Things We Leave Unfinished by Rebecca Yarros. Get the book at planetalibre.com.